Well, I started out life as a reporter. I ran a newspaper in Northern Virginia just outside of Washington, D.C. And the way I got started in this was an old guy called me up on the telephone one day and said, "Boy, have I got a great story for you. There's no gold left in Fort Knox." And when you run a newspaper, you get a lot of crazy stories every week. And so I developed a standard response. I went, "Oh, great, send me something in the mail." And I was off the phone in 30 seconds. And the crazy people never had anything to send. Well, this guy wasn't crazy. And I got, in a couple days, I got a thick sheaf of papers. He had heard, and was his hobby was that he understood that the federal law required an annual physical audit of the gold reserves in Fort Knox, and yet one had not been done since 1955. So as a reporter, I knew the government was hiding something and produced a story, but I really didn't understand how it fit in with the bigger picture. That took me about another 10 or 12 years to figure out. I wrote a book in 1992 called On the Horns of the Beast, the Federal Reserve and the New World Order. And a wealthy attorney read that in the United States. And he said, "Let's do something else." I said, "Well, let's do a video." And he said, "Okay, I'll pay for that." And that became The Money Masters, which I produced in 1996. The problem is twofold. Number one is that nations are borrowing primarily from banks. My latest book is entitled No More National Debt, and the reason I do that is because I think it's the most important way to get this message across politically, is to inform people. They've all heard of the national debt of the various nations. To inform people that you don't have to run your nation that way. A nation doesn't have to have a national debt. It is the most important power of a sovereign nation to produce its own money for the benefit of we the people, all equally, not for the benefit of them, the banks. So number one is that you don't have to have a national debt. The second most important reform that's needed is under the current system. Banks practice something called fractional reserve lending, which is they only have to have a small portion of that which they actually lend out. So if they have 1,000,000 krona in their bank as capital, they're legally able to lend out 10, 20 times that. It's just money they create literally out of a bookkeeping entry and have the audacity to lend that into the economy to us at interest. That's the problem. It's the evil, the fraud of fractional reserve lending. So the two main reforms that are needed is, number one, to end this practice of fractional reserve lending. Banks should only be able to lend money they actually have. It's perfectly fair. It's the way you and I have to operate. It's the way banks should operate. And number two, nations should not be allowed to borrow, because when they borrow primarily from banks, and thereby the banks end up controlling the politics of the nation. As long as you have a nation borrowing from banks, I can guarantee you that there will never be effective legislation to control those banks. And I foresee a time coming when the next big bubble pops, when the next big economic collapse comes, which is absolutely inevitable. They're now trying to forestall it with this quantitative easing, which is merely they're pumping more money into the economy to try to re-inflate the big bubble that broke in 2008. But that day of reckoning is going to come. That's going to come to an end. And at that point, I have foreseen for at least 20 years that the gold money system is going to be reintroduced. And so what I focus on with everything I do is showing how gold has worked in the past and hasn't worked in the past. Yes, you can control the quantity of the national money by using gold money. It matters not what backs the money. It doesn't matter if you have gold backing the money or nothing backing the money. All that matters is who controls the quantity. This is a quantity issue. As long as you have banks manufacturing money out of thin air, through fractional reserve lending. They are controlling the quantity. And even if you went to a gold system, and history shows that even when we've been under a gold system, you can't control the quantity because banks end up owning the gold. They end up using that to make loans through fractional reserve lending or not. We were on a gold system during the Depression in the United States during the 1930s, and so was Britain. And that didn't help us any. So it matters not what backs the money. All that matters is who controls the quantity. And when you're on a gold money system, I guarantee you the bankers will once again control the quantity. Well, with the fractional reserve system, banks start out with a capital base, let's say, of 1 million krona. And in the United States, we'll say $1 million. In the United States, that would allow them to lend out $10 million at interest. So let's say a bank is lending out money at 6% to you and I for mortgages, or in this day and age, 4%. But it's not just 4% they're making, because they're lending that out 10 times over. They're making 40% per year, and that's only if they follow the rules. We found out as a result of the 2008 congressional investigations that J.P. Morgan was lending out 52 times the amount of money it actually had. Freddie and Fannie were lending out 80 times the amount of money they actually had. And Goldman Sachs was lending out 333 times the amount of money they actually have. Now in Europe, the reserve requirement has been cut from 2% to 1% to 0. So now banks can effectively create infinite amounts of money. This means that your national government, we the people coalescing as a government, are not in control of the quantity of money. The banks are in control of the quantity of money because they can create it infinitely. And when you have that situation of banks completely controlling the economy, guess what? They're going to do it for their profit. They're not going to do it for the benefit of you and I, for the benefit of we the people. So they can create bubbles, as they're doing right now, and when they stop creating this money, it'll cause a crash. When they're ready to have that crash occur, they benefit both on the going up and the coming down. You and I don't benefit on either side. Power is much too consolidated at this point. It's much too undemocratic. And so in everything we do, we have to deconsolidate power at every level of governance and finance. And so the future model can be any of a dozen different schemes that I've seen. There's a good Danish model here with small community banks. A Swiss gentleman that I'm going to see tomorrow or the next day has developed a wonderful model which he's experimented with in Madagascar, which is now spread through 20,000 communities in Madagascar, which involves a bank composed of just 100 people in a little village. They'll go into the village and they trade hours, credits of their hours of work. And this has completely revamped the economy of Madagascar, and it's a wonderful model. So there are numerous different models that can occur, but they all involve deconsolidating power, deconsolidating the money power, and eliminating the ability of the federal government to borrow.